Friends, thank you for being here today. We find ourselves at a profound crossroads in our national history. It is March 2026, and the relationship between Canada and the United States, two nations that have stood shoulder to shoulder as best friends, closest neighbors, and unbreakable military partners for generations, is cracking. But this fracture is not happening because Canada has changed its values. It is happening because the very definition of partnership in Washington has been warped beyond recognition. Today, Canada is pushing back against one of the most heavy-handed military demands Washington has ever attempted to impose on us in modern history. And as you have likely seen on the news, Donald Trump is not taking it well. The tension has reached a boiling point. The words currently being hurled across the 49th parallel from the Oval Office would have been absolutely unthinkable just a decade ago. But we are not going to look at this through the lens of cable news hysteria or loud, emotional political theater. We are going to look at the facts. We are going to examine exactly what is happening, why Ottawa has taken such a measured, calculated stance, the truth behind Trump's furious reaction, and what this quiet defiance means for the sovereign future of Canada and North American defense. Grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let us look at the reality of the board. Because this story has layers, and to truly understand the geopolitical chess match currently underway, we must start by looking back at the foundation of our security, NORAD. We have to begin by re-evaluating our 67-year legacy with Washington and recognize why the days of the automatic yes are finally over. Most of us grew up with the comforting reality of NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command. We know the acronym, but it is vital to remember what it actually represents. Created in 1958, right in the freezing depths of the Cold War, NORAD was born out of a terrifying mutual vulnerability. The United States and Canada both looked up at the Arctic and realized that if Soviet nuclear bombers were coming, they were coming right over our northern frontier. At that time, leaders in Washington understood a fundamental truth. No single nation, not even the mighty United States, could defend that massive, unforgiving expanse of northern airspace alone. So, our two nations did something entirely unprecedented in modern military history. We agreed to share the burden as equals. We built a joint military command, woven together with Canadian and American personnel, tasked with watching the skies, tracking incoming threats, and responding as one unified shield. The structure of NORAD was a testament to mutual respect. The commander has always been an American four-star general, but the deputy commander is always Canadian. It was an alliance built not on subordination, but on deep trust, shared democratic values, and the geographic reality that the Canadian Arctic is the front door to the entire continent. For over 67 years, through the Cuban Missile Crisis, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the tragedy of 9/11, that agreement worked flawlessly. It was the gold standard of international defense cooperation. But the climate in Washington has changed. The era of the United States viewing Canada as an equal partner, a brother in arms whose sovereignty is to be respected, has rapidly deteriorated under the current Trump administration. We have entered an era of aggressive transactionalism. Washington no longer seems to look at Ottawa and see an ally. They look at us and see a subordinate, a vast piece of real estate that should simply do as it is told, buy what it is sold, and hand over the keys to its airspace on demand. The core thesis of what we are witnessing today is not about Canada breaking a military pact out of impulse or anti-American spite. That is the narrative Washington wants you to believe. The truth is far more dignified. Ottawa is calmly, rationally refusing to allow a cooperative, mutual defense agreement to be quietly downgraded into a U.S. military occupation of Canadian airspace. The days of the automatic yes to Washington are over. The true catalyst for this crisis, however, boils down to a fight for sovereignty over our own military supply chains and the dilemma surrounding the F-35 fighter jet. To understand the current crisis, we have to look at the machinery of war, specifically fighter jets. Canada's fleet of CF-18 Hornets has served us well, but they are aging out of the sky. A replacement is not just a want, it is an absolute strategic necessity. In 2021, under immense pressure to conform to NATO standards and American expectations, Canada held a formal competition and selected the F-35 Lightning II, manufactured by the American defense giant Lockheed Martin. On paper, from a purely technical standpoint, the F-35 is a highly advanced, stealthy piece of machinery. The plan was set for Canada to purchase 88 of these jets to modernize the Royal Canadian Air Force. But as the years progressed, the political and economic climate fundamentally transformed. We found ourselves in the crosshairs of arbitrary, punishing American trade wars. Tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum invoked by the Trump administration under the frankly insulting guise of national security opened the eyes of millions of Canadians. Why? We began to ask, are we tethering the entirety of our future aerial defense capability to a country that views our lumber and metal workers as a national security threat? This is where the Saab Gripen entered the conversation, and why it became the catalyst for the current geopolitical showdown. The new Canadian government, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, began to look at the Swedish-made Saab Gripen not merely as an alternative airplane, but as an instrument of economic sovereignty. When you buy an F-35, you don't really own it in the traditional sense. You are permanently locked into Lockheed Martin's proprietary maintenance software, global supply chains, and upgrade cycles. If Washington gets angry with you over a trade dispute, they hold the digital keys to your Air Force. Saab, recognizing Canada's desire for true independence, offered a fundamentally different paradigm. They didn't just offer an excellent Arctic-capable fighter jet, they offered true partnership. Saab proposed building state-of-the-art manufacturing facilities right here in Ontario and Quebec. They projected the creation of an estimated 12,600 high-paying, highly skilled Canadian jobs. Most importantly, they offered Canada the intellectual property rights and the sovereign capability to maintain, upgrade, and control our own aircraft without having to ask the Pentagon for permission. For Canadians, especially those of us who remember the tragic cancellation of the Avro Aero and the historic loss of our aerospace independence to American interests, this offer was electrifying. It was a chance to reclaim our manufacturing destiny. The Canadian public understood this immediately. Polling data from earlier this year revealed a massive shift in the national consciousness. Roughly 43% of Canadians directly supported scrapping the American F-35s in favor of the Swedish Gripens. Another 29% favored a mixed fleet. Let that sink in. Roughly 7 out of 10 Canadians held deep reservations about an exclusive, multi-billion-dollar dependency on the American military-industrial complex. This was not a fringe political movement. This was a unified democratic mandate from the Canadian people. It was a clear message to our government: prioritize our self-reliance, protect our economy. Do not tie our ultimate security to an administration in Washington that treats its allies like disposable contractors. Ottawa listened, and the serious pivot toward the Gripen began. Let me pause right here and ask you directly. Do you believe Canada should prioritize keeping these manufacturing jobs and intellectual property within our own borders, even if it angers Washington? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And that is when Washington lost its temper. When Canada began to assert that economic independence, Washington responded not with diplomacy, but with a naked ultimatum. If you ever wanted a clear contrast between the quiet, rule-of-law diplomacy of Canada and the loud, bullying tactics of the current U.S. administration, you need look no further than late January 2026. Sensing that Canada was about to break free from the Lockheed Martin contract, the U.S. ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, went on CBC News. He did not go on our national broadcaster to offer a better deal. He did not go on to reaffirm the unbreakable bond of our two nations. He went on national television to issue a public threat. Ambassador Hoekstra explicitly stated that if Canada backed out of the F-35 deal and chose what he arrogantly termed an inferior product, referring to the highly capable Swedish Gripen, the very structure of NORAD would have to be altered. He argued that this decision would compromise North American defense capabilities, and consequently, Washington would have to find a way to fill the gaps. Let us translate that diplomatic doublespeak into plain English. The ambassador of the United States looked the Canadian public in the eye and said, "If you do not spend tens of billions of dollars on our airplanes, we will unilaterally rewrite the treaty that has kept our skies safe for 67 years. We will routinely fly American fighter jets over your sovereign territory without your explicit control because we no longer trust you to do it yourselves." To Canadians, this was not a disagreement over military procurement. This was extortion. Now, history context is crucial here. Has American aircraft ever intercepted threats over Canadian soil? Yes. NORAD operates on a principle of the closest asset responding. During a bomb threat involving a German airliner near Calgary, U.S. jets scrambled to assist. In early 2023, when a suspected Chinese surveillance balloon drifted over the Yukon, a U.S. F-22 shot it down. We welcome that. Why? Because it was a coordinated, two-way street based on mutual consent and shared command. It was friends helping friends. But what Ambassador Hoekstra was threatening was entirely different. He was threatening a routine, uninvited American military presence in Canadian airspace. He was describing a scenario where the United States assumes operational control of our skies as a punitive measure for bad economic behavior. That is not an alliance. By any historical definition, that borders on an occupation. I'm curious to hear from those of you who have watched this relationship evolve over the decades. Have you ever seen Washington treat Ottawa with such open disrespect? Does this sound like a true alliance to you? Tell me your reaction down in the comments. The pushback from Canada's top defense intellectuals was immediate, composed, and devastatingly logical. They did not resort to name-calling. They used facts. Andrea Sharon, the brilliant head of the Center for Defense and Security Studies at the University of Manitoba and one of the foremost experts on NORAD, cut right to the heart of the matter. She pointed out that Washington's public bullying actually undermines the security of North America. When the United States openly threatens its closest neighbor over a procurement contract, adversaries like Vladimir Putin in Russia and Xi Jinping in China take eager notes. They see a fractured alliance. They see weakness created entirely by American hubris. Vincent Rigby, a former national security advisor with over 3 decades of distinguished diplomatic and military service, dismissed Hoekstra's comments with icy precision. He labeled it a political pressure tactic, an off-the-cuff remark meant to intimidate, rather than a genuine strategic doctrine. The consensus in Ottawa was clear. Washington is trying to treat Canada like a vassal state, forcing us to buy their weapons through threats to our sovereignty. But Canada, armed with logic and the steadfast support of its people, refused to flinch. Because Ottawa knew something that Washington had seemingly forgotten. Canada holds the ultimate trump card. Yet, in the face of these threats, Canada remained calm because we hold the ultimate geopolitical leverage, the Arctic and the keys to the Golden Dome. In geopolitical negotiations, true power rarely needs to shout. The United States has the loudest megaphone in the world, but Canada controls the actual geography of the board. And this brings us to the most critical, least understood element of this entire crisis, the Arctic and the Golden Dome. For years, the Trump administration has been obsessively pushing a massive, futuristic defense initiative dubbed the Golden Dome. In theory, it is an impenetrable, continent-wide ballistic missile defense shield reliant on an incredibly complex network of advanced radar, satellites, and interceptors. The goal is to make the United States entirely immune to nuclear strikes. It is a grand American ambition. But there is a glaring, fatal flaw in their design. You cannot build a dome over your house if you don't own the roof. The geographic reality of the globe is absolute. If a ballistic missile is launched toward the continental United States from Russia, China, or North Korea, it does not fly across the Pacific or Atlantic Oceans. The shortest, most direct route, the route every military planner in the world prepares for, is straight over the North Pole, straight through the Canadian Arctic. General Glenn Van Herk, the highly respected American 4-star general who formerly commanded NORAD, stated this reality plainly. When speaking about Canada's contribution to continental defense, he said, "The biggest thing they offer is the real estate. Without Canadian territory, without our land to host the advanced radar systems, the communication arrays, and the early warning sensors. The Golden Dome has a massive blinding blind spot facing north. The American shield is fundamentally useless without Canadian cooperation. Canada possesses geographic leverage that cannot be bought, cannot be replicated, and cannot be bypassed. We hold the keys to the northern gate. And how did Canada choose to play this monumental hand? Did we hold a furious press conference? Did we threaten to cut off ties? No. We acted like the adults in the room. As Washington threatened tariffs and attempted to bully us into the F-35 contract, the Canadian Department of National Defence released a statement regarding our participation in the Golden Dome that should be studied in diplomatic history classes. A spokesperson stated calmly, "Those conversations are ongoing, and we will only participate if it is right for both parties." Read the absolute brilliance of that statement. Canada did not throw a tantrum and say no. Canada did not capitulate and say yes. Canada established a toll gate. It was Ottawa delivering a masterclass in quiet negotiation. The message, delivered with a polite, icy smile, was unmistakable. We know exactly what we have. We know exactly what you need. You cannot build your shield without our land. So if you want access to the Canadian Arctic, you will stop treating us like a subordinate. You will stop the tariff wars. You will respect our right to buy the Saab Gripen if we choose to. You will treat us as a sovereign equal, or your multi-trillion-dollar Golden Dome remains a fantasy. It was the ultimate checkmate. Canada used the immutable laws of geography and quiet, legalistic diplomacy to completely neutralize the emotional, transactional bullying coming from the Oval Office. When you understand who truly controls the board, the psychology behind Donald Trump's fury makes perfect sense, and it is validating Canada's stance on the global stage. When the realization set in that Canada was not only seriously considering the Swedish Gripen, but was also quietly holding the Golden Dome hostage, the reaction from the White House was predictably explosive. Donald Trump, who operates almost exclusively on a transactional worldview, took to his usual channels to express his fury. He labeled Canada's potential decision as a betrayal of the alliance. He suggested that if Canada didn't buy American, Canada wouldn't get American protection. His surrogates flooded the airwaves, insinuating that Canada was trying to go rogue while simultaneously fighting Washington on trade. But as analytical observers, we must look past the bluster and deconstruct the psychology of this tantrum. Why is Washington so furious? It is not because the Saab Gripen is a threat to North American security. It is because Canada called their bluff. Trump's foreign policy is built on the premise of the protection racket. The assumption is that smaller nations, terrified of global instability, will pay whatever price Washington demands, whether in lopsided trade deals or exclusive military contracts, to stay under the American security umbrella. Canada shattered that paradigm. By demanding economic autonomy, by protecting our domestic manufacturing, and by weaponizing our own geography to force a fair negotiation, Canada rejected the premise that we are a subservient client state. We demanded to be treated like a sovereign nation. And to a presidency that views every interaction as a zero-sum real estate deal, being outmaneuvered by the polite neighbor to the north is an infuriating humiliation. But Canada is not standing alone in this realization. Our quiet defiance is reverberating across the globe, providing a blueprint for other democracies who are trapped in Washington's increasingly erratic orbit. Consider the geopolitical warning that came from Denmark just weeks ago. Denmark is a steadfast NATO ally. They succumbed to American pressure years ago and purchased the F-35 fleet, deploying some of them to Greenland. A strategic move made partially to placate Washington after the bizarre aggressive suggestions by the Trump administration that the U.S. might try to buy or seize the Arctic island. In early 2026, the head of the Danish Parliament's Defense Committee did something extraordinary. He openly expressed regret. He admitted that Denmark had grave second thoughts about the F-35 purchase, realizing too late that it had entirely surrendered its military supply chain sovereignty to a deeply unpredictable America. But because those jets are now their only operational fighters, Denmark is trapped. The Danish official had a direct public message for Canada: choose another fighter jet. When a NATO ally who has already walked down the path of complete reliance on American military hardware turns around and begs Canada not to make the same mistake, the world pays attention. It proves that Ottawa's hesitation is not born of anti-Americanism. It is born of prudent, visionary statecraft. Middle-power democracies around the world, from Europe to the Indo-Pacific, are watching Canada right now. They are watching how our government navigates this aggressive, transactional Washington without capitulating. By standing firm on the Gripen and holding the line on the Arctic, Canada is literally writing the modern playbook on how to maintain national sovereignty in the shadow of a declining superpower's erratic demands. We are showing the world that you do not have to surrender your dignity to secure your borders. As we look to the future, it becomes clear that Canada is not walking away, but rather redrawing the map of North American defense entirely on our own terms. So, where do we go from here? Does this mean Canada is abandoning the defense of North America? Are we leaving NORAD and walking away from our responsibilities? Absolutely not, and the data proves it. While Washington accuses us of betrayal, Canada has quietly committed an astonishing $28.3 billion over the next 2 decades to drastically modernize NORAD. We are funding the construction of next-generation, over-the-horizon radar systems deep in our Arctic and across Ontario, slated to be fully operational by 2029. This is not the action of a nation abandoning an alliance. It is the action of a nation investing heavily in its own defense, and by extension, the defense of the continent. But here is the crucial distinction. We are paying our own way, and therefore we will do it on our own terms. We recognize that the threats from Russia and China in the high north are real. Our security is permanently linked to the United States, but partnership does not mean subservience. What we are witnessing is a paradigm shift. Canada is not walking away from the United States. We are actively renegotiating the terms of our existence on this continent. We are telling Washington that we are here. We are capable. We will spend the money to protect the Northern Gate, but we will fly the aircraft we choose to fly. We will build the factories in our own provinces. We will employ Canadian workers. And we will never tolerate threats to alter the treaties that govern our sovereign airspace. Consider the broader economic reality of this standoff. When Washington attempts to coerce us into exclusive multi-billion-dollar defense contracts under the threat of altering treaties, they are not just attacking our military autonomy, they are indirectly threatening our domestic prosperity. Every $1 billion siphoned out of Canada to feed the American military-industrial complex is $1 billion diverted from our own strategic resources, our infrastructure, and the vital healthcare system that defines our social fabric. By choosing domestic manufacturing and standing our ground, we are not just defending our airspace. We are fiercely protecting the economic lifeblood that sustains Canadian communities. Friends, the era of Canada automatically deferring to the loudest voice in the room is officially over. We are a nation built on the rule of law, quiet resilience, and strategic intelligence. The coming months will be critical. The final contracts will be signed. The fate of the Golden Dome will be decided. But through it all, we can take immense pride in how our country has conducted itself. While others have resorted to table-pounding, tariff threats, and emotional outbursts, Canada has remained calm. We have used our geography as an anchor, our intellect as a shield, and our unwavering commitment to our own sovereignty as our guiding light. We are proving to Washington and to the entire world that the measured resolve of a proud, independent nation can effectively neutralize the loudest bullying on the geopolitical stage. I want to turn this over to you for our final thought. Is Canada making the right move by standing our ground and playing the long game, or are we taking a gamble with our continental security? Leave your comments below so we can get a real-world Canadian perspective on this. If you found this deep dive valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe so we can keep bringing you the facts. Canada remains the true north, strong and free, and we intend to keep it that way. Thank you.